In the year 2472, humanity had long since spread across the stars, establishing vast colonies on distant worlds. The United Earth Alliance controlled a sprawling empire, but even with its immense reach, the mysteries of the universe remained abundant and elusive. However, in the farthest reaches of human exploration, something was about to shake the very foundations of human history. The discovery came on a planet known as Iskara, a cold, desolate world far beyond the outer rim of the human-controlled territories. Originally classified as uninhabitable, the planet had been overlooked for centuries. That was until an unmanned survey probe, designed to scan for resources, returned an anomalous data transmission. It wasn't much, just a brief pulse of electromagnetic interference, but it was enough to prompt further investigation. A team of researchers, led by the brilliant Dr. Anya Harker, was dispatched to investigate. When they landed on the surface of Iskara, they found nothing but a vast expanse of jagged rocks and icy plains. But beneath the surface, something was waiting. Buried deep in the icy core of a mountain range, they unearthed a massive stone structure, unlike anything humanity had ever seen. It was old, older than anything that could be attributed to human hands. Carved from an unknown black stone, the structure's design bore no resemblance to any known architectural style. The air around it seemed to hum with an ancient energy, almost as if the very mountain had been built to conceal its secrets. Excited but cautious, Dr. Harker and her team set to work. Using cutting-edge technology, they cracked open the sealed entrance, revealing a long-forgotten chamber inside. At the center of the chamber, they discovered an artifact. It was a simple, smooth orb, glowing faintly with a soft blue light. But it wasn't the orb itself that drew their attention. It was the markings carved into the stone walls surrounding it. Dr. Harker, a specialist in alien languages, ran her fingers over the inscriptions, her heart racing. The language was ancient, yet its structure was oddly familiar. Her initial instinct was to dismiss it as just another variation of known galactic scripts. But then her eyes caught something, a single phrase repeated across the walls. The forgotten oath. As the days passed, Dr. Harker and her team worked tirelessly to decode the markings. They soon realized this was no ordinary discovery. The inscriptions didn't just speak of a lost civilization. They spoke of an oath, a promise made millennia ago, one that was tied directly to humanity's origins. Late one evening, while reviewing the data, Dr. Harker discovered something even more startling. The inscriptions contained an intricate map, a map that seemed to chart the movements of celestial bodies, as if guiding someone toward a destination. The map led to the very heart of the galaxy, to a place where no one had ever ventured. The implications were staggering. Could humanity's distant ancestors have once been part of something far greater than they ever knew? The following morning, Dr. Harker gathered her team. The atmosphere was tense, electric with the weight of their findings. They had uncovered something bigger than they could have imagined. This was not merely an artifact. This was a legacy, one that spoke of a time when humanity was not just a fledgling species. Humanity had once been part of a galactic alliance, an alliance that stretched far beyond anything the modern world had ever seen. But before she could share this revelation with her superiors, strange signals began to interfere with their communications. The lights flickered, and the base's sensors began picking up anomalous readings. Something out there was watching. Something ancient was beginning to stir. And with it, a forgotten promise, long buried in the depths of the cosmos, was about to awaken. The morning after Dr. Anya Harker's shocking discovery, Iskara's surface seemed strangely quiet. The winds, which had once howled across the barren plains, fell silent. It was as if the planet itself had sensed the awakening of something that had been dormant for millennia. Yet beneath the surface, something darker was stirring, something that had been watching, waiting. The strange electromagnetic interference that had plagued the base the previous night intensified. Dr. Harker's team worked tirelessly to analyze the signals, which appeared to be emanating from deep within the planet. The readings were incomprehensible, too erratic to identify. Yet one thing was clear: these weren't random fluctuations. Someone, or something, was actively transmitting. The deeper Dr. Harker delved into the artifact's inscriptions, the more unsettling the truth became. The markings didn't just tell the story of an alliance between the Eldrari, an ancient and powerful race, and humanity. They spoke of an impending cataclysm, a great, looming threat that the galaxy had been quietly bracing for, even as its attention shifted to more immediate concerns. The Kalthari, a long-forgotten race believed to have been wiped out during the First Galactic War, were not gone. They had only been biding their time, waiting for the right moment to rise again. The inscriptions detailed the Kalthari's origins, how they were a race of conquerors who had once terrorized the galaxy, before their defeat at the hands of the Eldrari and their allies. But unlike the Eldrari, whose power was rooted in knowledge and mastery of the stars, the Kalthari's strength was in their ability to manipulate fear, turning the very psyche of their enemies against them. In the aftermath of their defeat, they were scattered, exiled to the darkest corners of the galaxy, their memory erased from most records. But the oath that humanity had forgotten was meant to protect against them. Dr. Harker's mind raced as she pieced together the fragments of the oath. The Eldrari had trusted humanity with a crucial role, one of guardianship and protection. The Kalthari had been sealed away, but only humanity could ensure their banishment remained permanent. But the true cost of this guardianship, Dr. Harker realized, was not just defending against an alien threat. It was a bond forged in blood, tied to the deepest parts of humanity's essence. And that bond had been broken, forgotten for centuries. Across the galaxy, strange things began to happen. The Kalthari, though silent and unseen, were not idle. Planets on the edge of human space began to report unexplained disappearances. Outposts and colonies left abandoned, their inhabitants vanishing without a trace. Ships on long-range missions reported encounters with shadows that lurked just outside the edge of sensor range, entities that seemed to flicker in and out of existence. The United Earth Alliance, shaken by these reports, called for an emergency meeting. The Interstellar Council convened on Mars, where leaders from the various human colonies and alien allies gathered. The mood was tense. The Kalthari, while unseen, were felt everywhere. The Oath Keepers, a group of secretive individuals who had kept the legacy of the ancient promise alive, began to emerge from the shadows, revealing themselves to those who were chosen. Among them was Captain Marcus Cole, a decorated officer in the Alliance's elite forces. Cole had heard whispers of the Oath Keepers, but had never truly believed in the myth. Now, standing before Dr. Harker and the Council, this wasn't just an alliance. Dr. Harker muttered to herself as she reviewed the data. This is something that's been ingrained in us for millennia. The power of the oath is inside us. We're not just meant to protect. It's in our blood to fight. Yet as she delved deeper, Dr. Harker couldn't help but feel the magnitude of what this meant. The dormant power locked within humanity had not been tapped for centuries. To access it, they would need to overcome their own fears, doubts, and weaknesses, something the Kalthari had mastered long ago. This wasn't just a war of technology or armies. It was a war for the very soul of humanity. Meanwhile, Captain Marcus Cole found himself thrust into the heart of the conflict. After years of leading elite military operations, he had seen his share of bloodshed, but this was different. The enemy was invisible, intangible, and yet it was everywhere. He had watched colonies burn to ash, only to find that the Kalthari did not strike with weapons, but with fear. The very essence of their enemies was their weapon, the ability to turn doubt into terror and fear into defeat. It was no longer a question of survival, it was about something deeper. Cole's first encounter with the Kalthari was like stepping into a nightmare. He had led a special forces team to investigate a derelict research station on the edge of the Helios cluster, a region recently plagued by disappearances. What they found was beyond anything he had expected. The station was empty, its systems offline, yet there were signs of recent activity, strange, indistinct shapes that flickered across their sensors and noises that couldn't be explained by any known source. When the crew went inside, Cole felt it first, a creeping, cold dread that filled every corner of his mind, gnawing at him from within. It wasn't the usual threat of an enemy in sight. It was a presence, unseen but deeply felt. It was the Caltheri at work, sowing fear, feeding off it, growing stronger with every second. The station's crew had all vanished, but there were traces of them, distorted recordings, fragmented communications. One message, a desperate cry from the station's commander, sent a chill down Cole's spine. They're in our heads. They make us doubt. They make us fear. They'll make us turn on each other. It was then that Cole realized what they were truly facing. The Caltheri had found a way to invade the mind, to twist the very fabric of reality through fear. The most terrifying part was that there was no way to fight back with conventional weapons. The Caltheri didn't need to destroy physical bodies. They simply had to destroy the will to fight. As Cole shared his findings with Dr. Harker, she paled. "They've been preparing for this moment for centuries," she said softly. "But so have we." The revelation hit like a thunderclap. The Oath Keepers weren't just stewards of ancient knowledge. They were the first among humanity to recognize the deep, latent power within the human race, an ability to overcome even the greatest fears, to tap into something beyond the physical. If humanity was to survive, they would need to awaken that power, not through technology, but through their own potential. Dr. Harker and Captain Cole's paths would now cross in ways neither could have predicted. To confront the Caltheri, humanity would need to confront its own darkest fears, an enemy within far more dangerous than any external force. And so the journey to unlock the forgotten power of the Oath began. With every step, they moved closer to the heart of the galaxy's most ancient mystery, and to the awakening of a force that could either save or destroy them all. The galaxy's tension reached a boiling point. Humanity's forces, now aware of the terrible power the Caltheri wielded, were mobilizing for war. Yet, even as military strategies were drawn up, there was an unsettling truth. Conventional tactics would not suffice against an enemy that could infiltrate the mind itself. Humanity's greatest weapon wasn't a starship or a plasma cannon. It was the latent power within their own bloodline, tied to the forgotten oath. Captain Marcus Cole had been assigned to lead one of the first offensive strikes against the Caltheri. His mission, to strike a blow against their hidden base on the remote world of Thanatos. Known for its deadly atmosphere and inhospitable terrain, Thanatos had been abandoned by most species, its desolation making it an ideal hiding spot for the Caltheri to conduct their operations undisturbed. It was rumored that the Caltheri were using the planet's harsh environment to breed an army, one that could infiltrate and dismantle humanity from within. But Cole knew that a simple assault would not be enough. His mission had a deeper purpose, to uncover the true strength of the Caltheri's psychological warfare, and in doing so, discover the key to stopping them. As his elite squad landed on Thanatos, they found themselves immersed in the planet's oppressive atmosphere. The skies were perpetually dark, swirling with violent storms that seemed to crackle with an unnatural energy. The air itself felt thick, as if the very planet was conspiring to keep them from discovering its secrets. As they moved deeper into the planet's craggy surface, the true horror of the Caltheri's influence became apparent. At first, the squad felt the usual unease that came with operating in such a hostile environment. But soon, they began to experience something far worse, subtle shifts in their perceptions. Captain Cole felt it first, an odd sense of disorientation, like the ground beneath his boots wasn't quite solid, or the shadows were moving with a will of their own. The soldiers began to murmur among themselves, their fears slowly creeping into their minds. It wasn't just the storm, something far darker was at play. They reached the heart of the Caltheri base, an abandoned research facility buried beneath a network of caves. The walls were lined with strange markings, similar to the ones Dr. Harker had discovered on Iskara, though twisted in a more sinister direction. It was clear now the Caltheri had been experimenting with psychic manipulation, amplifying their ability to warp reality itself. The base was alive with a hum of dark energy, a palpable presence that seemed to twist their very thoughts. Inside, the squad found what they feared most, a living Caltheri operative. Its form was like nothing they had encountered before. Tall and shrouded in shadow, its skin shimmered like a mirage, ever shifting, its features impossible to fixate on. It was an embodiment of fear itself, its very presence clawing at their psyches. But it was not the creature itself that struck terror into Cole's heart. It was the way it spoke, its voice a chorus of whispers that echoed inside his mind, twisting his thoughts. "Humanity, you have forgotten," the Caltheri hissed. "You have forgotten the price of your oath. The galaxy will bow before us, and you will know fear as you have never known it before." Cole's grip tightened on his weapon, but it was as if the Caltheri was inside his mind, digging into his most vulnerable memories. His thoughts were clouded, and for a moment he hesitated. The Caltheri had found his weakness, his fear. But in that brief moment of doubt, something inside him snapped into focus. He remembered the promise humanity had made long ago. The power to overcome fear had always been a part of humanity's core. He wasn't the only one who could be manipulated by fear, he could control it too. With a fierce shout, Cole pushed the fear aside, rallying his squad. "We're not your slaves. We will remember the oath." The soldiers, though shaken, found their resolve in Cole's words. Together, they stormed the Caltheri operative, overwhelming it with sheer determination. The battle was brutal, but they had one advantage the Caltheri did not: humanity's unyielding will to fight. The Caltheri operative was defeated, but the victory felt hollow. They had struck a blow, yes, but the war had only just begun. As the squad extracted vital data from the base's terminal, they learned something even more unsettling. The Caltheri were not just manipulating their enemies, they were manipulating the very fabric of reality. What they had uncovered in Thanatos was just a small piece of the Caltheri's greater plan. They were preparing to unleash a weapon, one that could reshape the galaxy in their image, bending entire civilizations to their will. Captain Cole's thoughts turned to the Oath Keepers, the ancient guardians who had first made the oath. He now understood the gravity of humanity's task. They could not simply fight the Caltheri. They had to awaken the power buried deep within themselves, the power tied to the oath. Only then could they hope to stand against the Caltheri and the darkness that threatened to consume everything they had fought to protect. As the mission concluded, Cole knew one thing for certain: this was only the beginning. The Caltheri's true strength had yet to be revealed, and humanity's first strike had only uncovered the surface of what lay ahead. The forgotten oath had been awakened, but now it was time to fulfill it before the galaxy fell into shadow. The victory on Thanatos, though significant, proved to be a fleeting triumph. While Captain Marcus Cole and his squad had managed to defeat a Caltheri operative and uncover critical data, the real scale of the threat was still unfolding. The Caltheri had already infiltrated human-controlled space, and their presence was being felt in more subtle, insidious ways. Fear was no longer just a weapon. It had become a contagion, spreading through the hearts and minds of every human within reach. On Earth, Dr. Anya Harker worked tirelessly with the Oath Keepers, the clandestine group of individuals who had long carried the knowledge of humanity's forgotten role in the galaxy. These secretive figures were the keepers of ancient wisdom, those who had studied the old texts, the maps, and the cryptic symbols left behind by the Eldrari, humanity's ancient allies. Together, they sought to awaken the dormant power buried within humanity's very biology, a force that could turn the tide against the Caltheri, But the task was not an easy one. The power humanity needed to tap into was not a simple gift. It was a deep well of potential, one that required unlocking a connection between mind, body, and soul. The Caltheri's influence, with its ability to twist perception and spread terror, was the perfect counter to this latent power. Fear was an enemy that would need to be overcome before humanity could harness the strength needed to face the coming storm. Dr. Harker had spent days combing through the data collected from Thanatos, examining the complex neuropsychological effects the Caltheri had inflicted on Cole's team. There was something deeply disturbing about the way the Caltheri attacked. They didn't just cause fear, they instilled a deep existential doubt. It wasn't enough for the Caltheri to terrify humanity. They wanted to break the very foundation of belief in human resilience. "We can't just fight them with our weapons," Dr. Harker said, her voice strained as she gathered her thoughts. "The Caltheri are trying to destroy our will to fight. If we're going to win this war, we need to understand them. We need to understand how to fight what they're doing to our minds." Captain Cole stood by her side, his expression grim. He had seen the effect firsthand, the growing terror and anxiety spreading through the fleet as Caltheri tactics took hold. It wasn't just soldiers cowering in fear. Entire colonies were falling apart, succumbing to the paranoia and dread that came with Caltheri manipulation. "We need to train ourselves to fight against fear itself," Cole said, his voice unwavering. "The Oath Keepers have always known this. We need to awaken the power that's been buried in us for centuries. The Caltheri can manipulate our minds, but they can't control our hearts." Dr. Harker nodded, her mind racing. The Oath Keepers had always believed that the strength of humanity lay in their ability to transcend fear, something the Caltheri had never understood. Fear had once been a survival mechanism, but it had also been a tool that could be used to awaken latent potential. It was time for humanity to reclaim that power. As preparations for the next phase of the war began, Dr. Harker and Captain Cole worked together to form a plan. The first step was to bring together the leaders of humanity's scattered colonies. They needed to unite to create a new order that would rise from the ashes of fear. The Caltheri had played their hand, but humanity had a secret weapon of its own, a fierce, unbreakable will to endure. The Oath Keepers were gathering, and their knowledge of the ancient pact would guide humanity's next steps. They would need to train the soldiers, the civilians, the leaders, everyone, how to awaken the latent power within them. Humanity's destiny was tied to that forgotten oath, but it was up to them to remember what it truly meant. With every passing day, the tide of war grew darker, but there was still hope. It was not a hope born of technology or military strength, but of something far more enduring. The will to rise above, to stand united, and to confront the fear that sought to break them. In every corner of the galaxy, humanity's defiance was beginning to stir. But the Caltheri were not idle. They had seen the signs of humanity's resistance, and they would not allow the spark of hope to ignite unchecked. The next phase of their plan was already in motion, and it would strike at the very core of what made humanity powerful. The war was far from over, but one thing was certain: humanity had been awakened. The forgotten oath was no longer just a relic of the past. It was the key to their survival, and they would fight to reclaim it, no matter the cost. The war against the Caltheri was escalating at an alarming rate. The Caltheri's shadow grew larger with every passing day, and their influence spread like a virus through the galaxy's darkest corners. Humanity, despite the awakening of its latent power, found itself on the defensive. The Caltheri had learned from their past mistakes and had adapted quickly, perfecting their ability to manipulate fear on a galactic scale. What began as an elusive enemy, hidden in the far reaches of space, had evolved into a relentless, pervasive force that preyed on the very heart of humanity's strength. Dr. Anya Harker and Captain Marcus Cole knew that humanity's survival hinged on more than just conventional tactics. They needed to confront the Caltheri on their own terms, and to do that, they needed to dive deeper into the ancient oath and the power humanity had forgotten. This was no longer just about war, it was about the very soul of humanity. The Oath Keepers, once an elusive group of guardians, had now become the leaders of humanity's resistance. They were teaching soldiers, civilians, and leaders alike how to recognize and resist the Caltheri's psychological manipulation. The training was grueling, designed to push people to their limits and force them to confront their deepest fears. But it was the only path forward. Captain Cole stood at the forefront of this new initiative, leading the charge on Earth as humanity's last hope. His training sessions were unlike anything he had ever experienced. Soldiers were put through simulations designed to push their minds to the brink of collapse, creating scenarios where they were forced to face their worst nightmares. Yet, as brutal as the process was, it also had a singular purpose: to teach them how to fight fear, how to take control of their minds, and not let the Caltheri's influence overtake them. But it wasn't just the soldiers who needed this training, it was the civilians too. Whole cities were falling into disarray as the Caltheri's influence crept in, turning neighbors against each other, friends into enemies, and families into strangers. The Caltheri didn't need to destroy the physical infrastructure of society. They were dismantling humanity from within, sowing distrust, anxiety, and terror. It was a psychological war, and the stakes couldn't have been higher. As the war on Earth intensified, the Resistance faced its first major setback. A fleet of Caltheri ships had arrived in the Sol system, their weapons untraceable and their methods devastating. Entire fleets of human warships were wiped out in the blink of an eye, their crews paralyzed by terror before they even knew what was happening. The Caltheri had perfected their ability to manipulate the minds of entire starships, infiltrating their crews' thoughts and amplifying their fears until they turned on each other. Desperate, Dr. Harker turned to the Oath Keepers for answers. They had once been tasked with preserving the ancient oath, but now they held the key to humanity's future. The Oath Keepers had preserved something far more important than knowledge. They had preserved a way to confront fear itself. They called it the Light of the Forgotten, a mental and spiritual technique passed down through generations of Oath Keepers. It was a process that would unlock the true potential within humanity, allowing them to harness their emotions and turn them into weapons, rather than allowing fear to control them. The key, Dr. Harker realized, was to embrace fear, not to defeat it, but to transform it. The Caltheri thrived on fear, but humanity had something they didn't: the capacity for resilience, for hope, for unity in the face of overwhelming odds. To unlock that power, humanity had to reconnect with their deepest, most primal instincts, the ability to push past fear, to stand together and say, "We will not break." Captain Cole, now leading the first wave of soldiers undergoing the training, felt the weight of the Oath Keepers' teachings. As the soldiers underwent their trials, Cole witnessed something extraordinary. Soldiers, once paralyzed by fear, began to change. They became stronger, more resolute, and more united. They no longer fought just for survival. They fought because they believed they could win. The light of hope, long buried beneath years of conflict and terror, began to flicker in their hearts. But it wasn't just the soldiers who were undergoing a transformation. Humanity as a whole was beginning to awaken. Across the galaxy, entire colonies started to rally, coming together in a unified front. The Caltheri were no longer the invisible, unstoppable force they once seemed. They were facing an enemy unlike any they had encountered before, a united humanity, no longer ruled by fear, but empowered by it. The war was about to enter its next phase. The Caltheri had made a critical mistake. They underestimated humanity's ability to rise above fear, to find strength even in the darkest of times. As the first human fleets began to strike back against the Caltheri, Captain Cole's words echoed in their minds. "We will not fear what we are meant to overcome." The battle for the galaxy was no longer just a fight for survival, it was a fight for the soul of humanity, and humanity was ready. The first true strike against the Caltheri came as a whisper in the dark, a faint tremor that built into a roar. Humanity, once fractured by fear, now stood united under a banner of resilience. The Oathkeeper's teachings had unlocked something profound in every soldier, every civilian, and every leader who embraced them. Fear was no longer a weapon the Caltheri could wield against them. It had become a source of strength, the very thing that would fuel humanity's resistance. They had taken back their minds, their will, and with it, their hope. Captain Marcus Cole stood at the head of a massive fleet in the Sol system, his eyes fixed on the enemy ships hovering just beyond the orbit of Mars. The Caltheri had underestimated the power of human unity, and now they would see the consequences. The fleet was a motley collection of ships from every human colony in the galaxy, military vessels, civilian ships, merchant craft, all of them working together in a way that had once seemed impossible. The battle would not be won by force alone, but by the conviction that humanity could stand together, stronger than ever before. Dr. Anya Harker, now a leading strategist in humanity's war effort, was overseeing the psychological warfare countermeasures being deployed in the fleet. The Caltheri's greatest weapon, fear, had been neutralized by humanity's newfound ability to face their darkest thoughts head-on. Harker's role was to ensure the psychological defenses remained strong, keeping fear from seeping into the ranks, as it had done before. She had helped create specialized training programs for soldiers, civilian leaders, and even children, all designed to teach them how to confront and channel their fear into power. Yet, the Caltheri were not without their own countermeasures. They had learned from their previous attempts at psychological manipulation, and their next move was already in motion. As the human fleet advanced, their sensors flickered, showing distortions in space itself. The Caltheri were activating their most dangerous weapon yet, a device that could manipulate gravity and time, distorting reality around them. The device was a weapon of pure fear, capable of disorienting an entire fleet, creating a field where the laws of physics were bent to the will of the Caltheri. "Captain, we're entering the gravity distortion field," warned Lieutenant Juno Saris, one of Cole's most trusted officers. "Brace yourself." Cole's mind raced as the first ripple of the Caltheri's weapon spread across the fleet. Time itself seemed to slow, and the stars in the distance stretched unnaturally. The human ships began to drift apart, their movements becoming erratic as the distortion field took hold. For a moment, Cole felt the familiar pull of doubt, a flicker of fear trying to creep back into his mind. He closed his eyes, focusing on the lessons of the Oathkeepers, remembering the words that had inspired humanity's resistance. "We will not fear what we are meant to overcome." The crew around him was not so easily swayed. They had learned to fight fear with unity, with purpose. "Hold together, people." Cole barked, his voice cutting through the rising panic. "Remember what we've learned. Focus, find your center, and hold the line. This is the moment we show them that we are not afraid." As if in response, the fleet began to reorganize. The ships, disoriented by the gravitational distortions, slowly began to move in synchrony, responding to the unspoken understanding that they were no longer just fighting for survival, they were fighting for their future. Humanity had awakened to its greatest strength, the ability to adapt, to rise above adversity, and to hold firm in the face of overwhelming odds. The Caltheri, watching from the shadows, realized their mistake. They had believed that their manipulation of reality would be enough to break the human spirit. They had underestimated humanity's innate ability to overcome fear and uncertainty. The power of the oath, the power of unity, had already begun to turn the tide, and so the battle raged on, the Caltheri's weapon struggling to keep humanity at bay as the human fleet pressed forward, refusing to be defeated. Captain Cole, his heart steady, knew that this battle was only a prelude to what was coming. But for the first time in this war, he felt a glimmer of certainty. Humanity was no longer at the mercy of the Caltheri. They had found their strength, and they would fight to the very end. As the human fleet pushed forward, Captain Cole turned to his crew. "We're going to win this. We have something they'll never understand." Lieutenant Saris nodded, her face resolute. "Fear doesn't control us anymore, Captain. We control it." In that moment, as the human ships navigated the distortions in space, the true power of the Forgotten Oath was realized. Humanity's resistance was no longer just a desperate bid for survival. It was a force of nature, unstoppable and unyielding. And the Caltheri, who had once seen humanity as nothing more than prey, would soon learn just how wrong they had been. The final confrontation was imminent. The Caltheri, once confident in their psychological warfare and their ability to manipulate fear, were now facing an enemy unlike any they had ever encountered. Humanity, galvanized by the teachings of the Oath Keepers and strengthened by their newfound unity, was no longer just surviving. They were fighting back with a purpose and power that the Caltheri could not fathom. Captain Marcus Cole stood on the command deck of the human flagship, the Resolute. The final battle loomed on the horizon. The Caltheri fleet, massive and dark, loomed at the farthest edge of the solar system, their flagship cloaked in shadow. The human fleet, still reeling from the effects of the Caltheri's gravity distortion weapon, had been regrouping for weeks, but now it was time to strike. Every ship, every soldier, every soul aboard the human fleet knew what was at stake. This would not just be a battle for survival, it would be a battle for the future of the galaxy. "Captain," Lieutenant Saris called, her voice sharp with tension. "The Caltheri are activating their final weapon. They're preparing to unleash a massive mind control signal. It's going to affect every living being within range. We need to act fast." Cole's heart pounded in his chest, but his mind remained clear. The Caltheri had been perfecting their ability to manipulate minds, to drown entire fleets in terror and chaos. But humanity had proven that they were no longer susceptible to such tactics. The Oath Keepers had taught them to confront their deepest fears head-on, and in doing so, they had unlocked the power to stand firm in the face of the Caltheri's greatest weapon. "We've come this far," Cole said, his voice steady. "We're not letting them win. We're going to take the fight to them, and we're going to break their hold on this galaxy." The human fleet began to advance, their weapons charged and their resolve unshakable. The Caltheri, sensing the impending assault, began to activate their final weapon, their mind control signal. A pulse of dark energy radiated outward, rippling through the vacuum of space and aiming to strike at the very core of humanity's will. It was a weapon unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen, capable of crushing resistance by erasing free will and replacing it with fear and submission. But humanity had prepared for this moment. Dr. Anya Harker, alongside the Oath Keepers, had developed a countermeasure, a psychic shield that would protect the minds of the fleet. The shield was designed not to block the Caltheri's signal, but to amplify the human mind's natural ability to resist fear. It would create a resonance effect, a wave of psychic energy that would shield the fleet and project the collective strength of humanity's unbreakable will. As the Caltheri signal reached its peak, humanity's shield activated. The minds of the fleet's soldiers and commanders flickered with an intense, radiant energy, fearless, unwavering, and united. The Caltheri signal collided with the human shield and shattered, its dark influence unable to penetrate the unyielding strength of humanity's collective resolve. The Caltheri flagship, realizing their weapon had failed, attempted to retaliate. But it was too late. The human fleet surged forward, its ships moving with deadly precision, empowered by the resonance of human strength and unity. The final battle erupted in a fury of plasma fire and laser beams, each strike echoing the collective defiance of every soul that had stood against the Caltheri. Captain Cole, aboard the Resolute, led the charge. His fleet engaged the Caltheri forces with a ferocity born of desperation and purpose. As the battle raged, Cole's thoughts were clear. This wasn't just about defeating the Caltheri, it was about reclaiming humanity's place in the galaxy. The Forgotten Oath was not merely a promise made centuries ago. It was the embodiment of humanity's strength, resilience, and undying will to rise above the darkness. In the heart of the battle, Cole's ship closed in on the Caltheri flagship. The Caltheri captain, a towering figure draped in shadow, stood at the helm, his mind connected to the network of terror that had once brought entire civilizations to their knees. But now his control over his fleet faltered. The Caltheri's mind control weapon had been shattered, and their soldiers, once so adept at manipulating fear, were paralyzed by an emotion they could not understand: defiance. "We are not your slaves," Cole said, his voice cold with resolve, as his ship's weapons locked onto the Caltheri flagship. "You will never control us again." With a final, decisive strike, the human fleet tore through the Caltheri flagship's defenses. The Caltheri, who had believed themselves to be the masters of fear, now found themselves at the mercy of a power they could not comprehend: the unshakable will of humanity. The flagship exploded in a fiery burst of light, the Caltheri's reign of terror finally coming to an end. As the last remnants of the Caltheri fleet were scattered and the war drew to a close, humanity stood victorious. But this victory was more than a military triumph. It was a testament to the enduring strength of the human spirit, to the power of unity, and to the forgotten oath that had, at long last, been fulfilled. The galaxy had changed. The Caltheri were no longer a threat. Humanity had reclaimed its future, and in doing so, had reminded the universe of what it truly meant to be human, resilient, defiant, and forever unbowed. The war was over, but the promise of the oath would live on, guiding humanity into a new era of exploration, peace, and strength. And Captain Marcus Cole, standing amidst the remnants of the battlefield, knew that this was only the beginning.